In this video we're going to look at pictorial views. Now, unlike an orthographic, a pictorial view tends to show us more than one face of an object. So if we look at this drawing right here, we can see the front and the side and the top all in one. It's a picture, it's a pictorial view, and we're going to look at a number of different types of pictorial view. We're going to look at the planometric, the isometric, the oblique, the perspective, which comes in two different flavours, and finally the exploded view. But first of all, why bother with a pictorial view? Well, there's a number of reasons why we would bother with a pictorial. They are easily understood by non-technical people. So for a non-technical person, a pictorial view is easier to read and understand than, say, a set of engineering or working drawings. Pictorial views tend to be more realistic than orthographic views. A pictorial view can also show the object's final colours and its final materials, and crucially it can also show the object fully assembled or disassembled as well. Let's take a look at some of them, and let's start off with the planometric. The planometric is great for floor plans and things like that, and therefore architects and interior designers and people like that love using planometrics, because lines are drawn at 45 degrees like this, and what that means is that you can basically put a floor plan down and project up from it and give it this illusion of height. Good on. Things drawn in the floor plan retain their true shape, so for example up here we can see that circle which appears on the floor plan will remain a circle in a planometric. Let's look at some examples. Hard to see the 45 degree lines in here, but this is an example of a planometric pictorial. And again, looking at these lines disappearing back at 45 degrees. So, like I said, loved by architects and interior designers, and also from time to time by garden designers as well. Here is the plan for what looks like a kind of bus stop with some paths around it. So that's the planometric. Let's move on to the isometric. Now the isometric, you can tell an isometric by it's very similar to a planometric, except that the lines recede at 30 degrees rather than 45. 30 degrees instead of 45. Vertical lines still show height, things like that as well. And you see isometric pictorial views getting used in loads of places. I've got some examples here of an instruction manual for a toaster and for a piece of artwork with actually a kind of inherent impossibility to it, because there's a funny little quirk in isometric projection which allows people to make impossible shapes like this. And also computer games, video games will use isometrics as well. What about oblique 3D? Well, oblique 3D has got the 45 degree receding lines again. These go back at 45 degrees. But the big thing about an oblique is that the front face is drawn as a true shape. Okay, so the front face remains undistorted. Then we send our lines back at 45 degrees. And in actual fact, we actually draw these lines at half their true length to give this illusion of depth and to increase and improve realism. Oblique 3D is used a lot in lettering and for sort of simple product design, as these sketches show as well. Notice how the front view is always undistorted, and it's everything going back is artificially shortened by half and is projected back at 45 degrees. Perspective views come in two different flavours. Okay, but before we get to that, we have to identify the components of a perspective view. A perspective view tends to have a horizon on it, which signifies eye level, and somewhere on that horizon you will find one or many vanishing points. And a vanishing point is the point in space at which all of our receding lines, or lines going into the distance, appear to converge to meet up at that vanishing point. I talked about two different flavours. We've got 1 and 2 point perspective. Let's look at some examples of that. So the first thing we're going to look at then is a 1 point perspective image, where I've highlighted on here all those receding lines which appear to converge at 1 point right in the middle of the image. Now the horizon is missing from here because it's an interior pictorial view, but nonetheless, if you can imagine, that vanishing point represents our eye level. What about 2-point perspective then? So something like this. We've got an interior shot again, and this time we've got lines which are disappearing off in both directions. We've got a vanishing point over at the right hand side of the page, just off of the image over here, and a vanishing point somewhere over at the left hand side of the page, actually off of my monitor here. So this is an example of 2-point perspective. What would you say this is? 1 or 2-point perspective? Well, it's 2-point, because if we follow, say, the roof line, let's follow the roof line. I've not put the lines in here, but follow the roof line. It zooms away off in this direction, as does the front of the car. It kind of zooms off in this direction as well. So we've got a vanishing point somewhere over here, somewhere off my screen, this way. We've also got a second vanishing point somewhere over here, because we can see that the side of the car, the lines tend to converge somewhere over here. So this is an example of 2-point perspective. Much more realistic than a 1-point perspective, much more realistic than any of the other type of pictorial views. I also want to talk about exploded views as well. Now you can take any pictorial view, oblique, isometric, whatever, and you can explode it. This happens to be an exploded isometric. And an exploded view is when you pull apart all the components and you show what's going on inside of a product or an environment or something like that. It's really helpful for non-technical people, and it's really great for assembly or disassembly instructions. Now, looking at this exploded view of the Nintendo Switch, it's a little cluttered from my eyes. What this artist has not done so well is not included a lot of gaps between things. If you want to make an exploded view really easy to read, then you'll make sure that all these overlaps are minimised and we've got far clearer gaps between things. And here's another example, this time of a house where they have exploded the walls and the roof off it so that we can see what's going on inside it. An exploded view is often to do with what's going on inside it. So that's us. We've covered pictorial views. We looked at planometrics, isometrics, obliques, perspectives, and exploded views. And we also discussed how they're great for non-technical people and great at showing the final assembly of something and the final colours and the final realism of an object.